Welcome back to the Daily Bread Bible Study. We are looking at day 27 for Monday, January 27th, 2020, looking to wrap up Exodus in chapters 38 through 40. So let's dive into it as we seek to wrap up Exodus. And so chapter 38 says a little bit more about the construction of the tabernacle. It talks about making of the altar of burnt offering and making the court of the tabernacle, which means that our folk heroes, Bezaleel and Aholiab, are busy at work with the other skilled individuals of Israel working to be able to provide the furnishings for the tabernacle. So let's pick it up in verse 24. It says, "All the gold that was used for the work and all the construction of the sanctuary. The gold from the offering was 29 talents, 730 shekels, measured by the sanctuary shekel. The silver from those of the congregation were counted was 100 talents and 1,775 shekels, measured by the sanctuary shekel." So that begs the question, that's a lot of references to measurements that we don't use currently. So I guess a good starting point would be, between talents and shekels. I've heard it's about 3,000 shekels for 1 talent. But the biggest question is, how do we make some sort of assessment on how much quantity of gold and silver were actually used? So I'm curious to know how much a talent weighs. So looking up talent and shekels in the Bibles, I can't really find any Bible referencing how much each exact measurement weighs. I looked up a little bit, and it had the comparison between other currencies, but that's pretty unhelpful for our day and time. So I went to the internet and Googled, and a lot of scholars look to say that a talent's about maybe 66 pounds in weight. But other scholars are debating that point, saying if you look at the logistics of it, that's going to make everything too heavy. The Ark of the Covenant would be way too much weight. And just a reminder that in Joshua 6:15, they marched the Ark of the Covenant on the shoulders and marched them around Jericho for 7 times on the 7th day, as they marched the Ark of the Covenant around 7 days. So, if there's too much weight, put on this, and, the Ark being laden with gold all over, then it's going to be too heavy for people to reasonably carry, and it's just not going to fit. A very helpful article was saying that it's probably about 1/10 of what most scholars think, about 6 pounds. But I think instead of focusing on all of these assessments around what gold weighs or any of this, I think the most helpful is actually a biblical reference to the talent. So let's look at that in 1 Chronicles 20 and verse 2. It says that David took the crown of Milcom from his head. He found that it weighed a talent of gold, and it was a precious stone, and it was placed on David's head. So in summary, I'd like to say, how much does a talent weigh? Well, I think the biblical answer is that it weighs as much as the crown that was put on David's head, right? If the talent is 66 pounds or something absurd like that, that's going to be very heavy on your head. And who would make a crown that's 66 pounds? It's possible, but it just doesn't seem very likely. So whatever you think the weight of the crown on David's head is probably a good basis for measurement of what the talent is and how much material was used there in the work in the sanctuary. So should say that a talent, should have said this at the beginning, that a talent, we're using it as just a measurement of weight. In the New Testament, a talent is referred to by Jesus in some of the parables, digging a hole and burying your talent and burying your talent in the ground. And so, yeah, the big question is really just how much do you think it weighs? How much was used in the tabernacle? How ornate is the tabernacle that you're imagining? Would be, I guess, the question I ask for you. Moving on to chapter 39, we see that they make the vestments of the priesthood. They have Aholiab working on the vestments, and then the work is in fact completed. And so setting it up for the ending in chapter 40, we see the tabernacle is set up, it's equipped, all of its equipment is brought in, and it says in Exodus 40:16, Moses did everything just as the Lord had commanded. And in the first of the month, in the second year, on the first day of the month, the tabernacle was set up. So they had it ready for the observance of the Festival of Unleavened Bread. They commemorated the year that they had been free from being slaves in Egypt, and they established it in the second year on that first month that they were free. So what a great way to celebrate their freedom and this challenging past year, but to establish the tabernacle. They see that God was pleased with their work, and that in Exodus 40:34 it says, Then the cloud covered the tent of meeting, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. Moses was not able to enter the tent of meeting because the cloud settled upon it, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. God was setting this place apart, filling it with his glory, the equipment in there, filling it with glory and all of his goodness. At the end of Exodus 40, the last stage that we see there for Exodus, it says, for the cloud of the Lord was on the tabernacle by day, and the fire was of the cloud by night, before the eyes of all the house of Israel at the stage of their journey. I find it humorous that it says the house of Israel, noticing that a couple things. It's not the house of the Israelites, it's not the house of the people, but it's the house of the nation of Israel, that this kind of act kind of forms them to continue to be and become even more of this set-apart nation by God. Also, the term house, is Bethel is a name used a lot. House of God is what that name means. And so the idea that there is a place for God to reside among mortals is very important here in this, the sense. So that God has a home, and God has a home amongst his people traveling with them, that God's presence comes into this home, and they are able to worship with God in the midst of this sanctuary. So we also hear that whenever God wanted to stay, they stayed, and whenever the cloud went out and was removed, when God moved, they moved. So that God's presence is not bound to this sanctuary explicitly, but this is the place where God chooses to interact with them as they are wandering on their journey. So as we conclude Exodus, I'd just like to take a moment to reflect on the journey. So Exodus, they started out as slaves in Egypt due to a famine. Joseph was forgotten about, and the Israelite people became slaves under harsh punishment, harsh slavery, harsh service. The Egyptians did not care about them, and God cared and showed them through Moses and God's mighty acts the ability to be led out into the wilderness in order that they may worship God. So, at the beginning of the story, which would be easier to imagine? That they would build a structure in civilization, or that they would build, structures in the wilderness? But so instead of, being there without any structures with God in Egypt, now at the end of the story, they are in this ornately designed tabernacle structure out in the middle of the wilderness, and they moved the tabernacle from place to place following God's Spirit. So no longer slaves, but out in the wilderness, running around following God. It's just a strange change from the beginning of the book to the end of the book, but one in which God is making his people ready to receive the promised land and all of the good things that God has for them. And they finally are able to follow God's presence and just worship. So may you be able to find a way to seek your transformation and whatever your starting point is, and wherever God leads you and ends up with all that's going on in your life. May that be a wonderful transition. May it be one that even through the wilderness journey, that it be fruitful, and may you be blessed in the midst of it, knowing that God is present with you and that God will come and lead you.